welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about your story with your dad. So did you want to introduce yourself, and then we could kick off about your life with him, growing up with him, etc.?
My name's Kayleigh. I have been fortunate enough to start a healing process and have really good support around me lately, and I learned a lot about my childhood and about my dad, and I really want to share my story so that other people can be encouraged to also share and to also get help when they're in difficult situations.
Yeah, of course. And this whole month on the podcast, actually, I'm having various people come on and talk about their stories with their dads. And yours is a very painful journey that I know you've been on, because it's been a story where, you know, it's very hard situation to resolve. So you've had to be very brave and put your own healing and self-care first. So just so, because I know your story, but just so other people know a bit about your childhood. And there's so much of your story that I relate to with my relationship with my dad. But if you could talk a little bit about your childhood, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I think it's so hard with the topic of narcissism to explain what it is like day to day, because it really is those daily interactions that just build up and completely wear away at you. Before I do say about my childhood, I would like to say, and I always like to say, that I really love my dad, and I pray for him. I pray that he can be self-reflective enough and do better, that he can be better. I like to start with that, because it's not easy for me to talk about him and what he's done, really.
Yeah, no, of course. And that's just so amazing and gracious for you to say that as well. And that's the same way as I feel about my dad. Like, he's done some really awful things, but I realized that he did that not out of lack of love for me, but actually because of his own trauma. So, sometimes for us to logically think like that, that's great. But obviously feeling that and healing that is a whole other thing, because you're like, as a little girl, you do think all these things are your fault. And that's part of the problem. And that's what a narcissist's brain is trying to tell you as well. But they do, our dads behaved the way they did because of their own trauma, because of what they'd been through in their lives, about any abuse they'd faced. But I'm so glad that you're being so honest about your story, because somebody will be listening to this podcast and will be like, that's my dad, or that's my uncle, or that's my mum, and is trying really hard to please them, and and follow all their rules. And that's why I wanted you on so much, because stop doing it. That's basically it. So that's if we get nothing else from this podcast, just hearing your story, it's such an empowering thing of, for so many years you were trying to do everything that he wanted, and then you realized that actually it's not
healthy for either of us.
Yeah, it doesn't make any difference, because I think when you're doing that for your parent, even as you become a woman yourself, you're actually just enabling them. That's what I've realized about my relationship with my dad. I wasn't helping him by pleasing him and doing all the things that he wanted me to, basically. But yes, so let's go back to the early years.
Okay, so a snippet of my childhood. I mean, it was made up with a lot of control from my dad towards me and my mum, a lot of anger from him as well, and he would be very rageful at anything, really. It could also be nothing. It could just be that you're in the room when he hasn't allowed you to come downstairs to the living room. And I mean, day to day, I basically lived in a room that I shared with my mum, because my dad took my room, and he would lock himself in there for his privacy or whatever. But like, sometimes I didn't see him for days. He would talk to me through the door. He would call us to come to the door to get him something, to do something for him. And the only reasons that he might come out for us is maybe that we've done something he didn't like, or he's angry. And I mean, sometimes he'd also be out of the room, but then it would be like, okay, he is sitting downstairs in the living room and he wants to watch TV, there must be no noise. There's no hoovering. What are you watching on your phone upstairs? He'll shout upstairs, turn it off. Everything was controlled, and it was always living on eggshells, really, walking on eggshells around him. And even things like, we need to make food, it's, Dad, can I make some food, please? He's like, ask again in half an hour. Dad, can I make some food, please? It's like, okay, you have 5 minutes at this time. And it was especially hard for my mom as well. He was also very controlling with my mom, and a lot of the things that he was doing with my mom, also physically abusive and emotionally abusive, financially abusive, I also didn't know about when I was still living at home, and I've only learned that since leaving home.
Yeah, I mean, God, there's just so much that I can relate to with your story. I mean, your dad does seem like he had a lot more rules than my dad, like rules and like compulsions of, you must do things this way, and if you don't, the rage happens. I mean, my dad definitely had that, so I still, like, it's so weird. My dad's been gone 13 years, but he used to just, sometimes he would lose his shit if the door wasn't shut, to the living room. But sometimes he would be fine. He wasn't consistent with his rules. So I just, like, as a freak of nature, I'm just always shutting doors, even now, because as a small child, I realized that would make him go. And even as a little girl, I remember, him lying in at a weekend. And if me and my brother my mum wasn't allowed to come downstairs with us. We had to be really quiet downstairs. And if he heard us, he would just lose his temper. And it just felt like all of the time you were trying to manage that outburst, right? And I don't know, like, my dad never hit me or anything. It was just the fear of the anger and the threat of it. And I don't know if that's the same for your dad. And that is, oh my God, it's just, I kind of wished sometimes he would hit me, because then he would see what his emotions were actually like. Whereas when you're, like, emotionally abusive, gaslighting someone, doing these controlling things, it really, it's like, it takes all your power away. And to grow up in that environment as a girl, that is just so difficult. Like, I can only imagine, like, how hard it was. Like, I bet you're just only scratching the surface. You're just like, and then he did this, and then he did this.
Yeah, so the more you talk, the more I think of. And yeah, you're totally right. Like, it's really, so yeah, I didn't get physically hit. My mum did have some physical abuse, but yeah, I wasn't physically hit. But I also only realized after I left home that actually I was scared of my dad. And the things he would say were very intimidating. My dad's a big guy. He's a boxer. He would often brag about how good he is at fights. And when he would get angry, he would be very serious, and he would say, look, don't push me, because I can get very angry and I'm being very calm right now compared to how I could be, and something like that is really intimidating, actually. And it's so hard in the moment. And when you're still living at home, when you've grown up with this parent, you really have this longing that they're good and that they have the best intentions for you and that they're safe. So the idea of accepting that they're not actually in a good place of mind or able to look after you and keep you safe is a really scary thing to accept.
But also, you don't know any different. That's the thing, right? Because they've been your dad forever, since you came into this world. So your nervous system is just used to being shit scared all the time. Like, that's what mine was. I didn't realize that was abuse. For one, I didn't know that was emotional abuse. That's why I talk about it a lot on my podcast, because people think that you have to be hit to be abused, but that is so abusive, to control someone, to have these rules on them, and that it doesn't allow you to become the person that you are meant to be, because you're so busy trying to please them and try to keep their rage to a minimum. And I think it, like, again, I can relate to his relationship with my mum was different to mine, where there was physical abuse, like marital rape and all sorts of awful things. And so I felt very protective of her, and very like her her voice when she couldn't speak, because I would stand up for her at points. And you know, and even that, I didn't even realize that that was really that awful, or like I wouldn't even let my brain go there, because when you're living in that environment, you're just trying to survive. And that's, I mean, you were at home for a long time as well, because I think my dad died when I was 26. Were you around about that age when?
I was 21 when I moved out.
Yeah. So all these years you've been trying to please him, to follow all the restrictions, to do all of his rules, and like it sounded like massively. I mean, did he allow you to study? Did he allow you to have jobs? Did he allow you to be any kind of have friends, like have boyfriends, go out? Like,
no, I mean, there were no boyfriends, and in our household there was also a religious element, because I'm a Christian, and my dad also would confess to be a Christian, and he would often use the Bible as well in justifying his behavior, which actually is unusual, because the fact that I had the Bible was the only reason that when I was about 16, when I started to really read it, that was the first time I was confronted with what the idea of real love is. And I read this 1 Corinthians 13, and it's talking about love being gentle and kind and wanting the best. And I was just like, this is not what's happening in my home. Like, it's not. This is wrong. And I didn't, though, have the wider context to realize just how unusual and just how severely bad it is. But I did know it was wrong. And so that at least helped me to know, okay, this is not behavior that I want to be in my future relationships. I want to, look for examples of good relationships outside of home that I can learn from. So also, though, with boyfriends and stuff, that was off limits, but also that wasn't a huge problem for me because I wasn't looking to have boyfriends.
But friends and like having a job, and
it was not easy. So anytime mum and dad would have an argument, and by argument it was more him being rageful at my mum, and I might have been out with a friend, I would often get told to come home immediately. So I might have been there for 2 hours. I need to come home immediately. No explanation. And it was really hard because I didn't tell my friends why. I just said, like, I'm really sorry. And it was really, really awkward. And also I couldn't have any friends over. No one was allowed in the house. And it was very restricted. I also wasn't allowed to go to after school clubs. And, I was really passionate about sports. I wasn't allowed to go to athletics. That was actually really hard. There were a lot of things that I really would have loved to do. I'd love to see, but I couldn't.
Were you allowed to study and get a job and all those things?
So I would have liked to get a job when I was 16. We didn't have a ton of money. Like, my mum was the only one working at home, so we didn't have a lot of money. I wanted to work, I wasn't allowed to work. And then when I was 18, I was thinking about university, I wanted to go to university. Everyone else was, so it was kind of like the next thing to do. I wasn't really allowed to go to university. And again, like you said, when you don't have context, you just think, oh, well, my parents aren't here my dad isn't really in support of university, never mind. And I ended up getting a really good other job anyway, so I could go into accounting, but in the end, that wasn't really for me. And it was actually when I left this first accounting job that I came home a bit later, and my parents had been alone for more than an hour, which is unusual because I would always have to be there with them. And they'd had a massive argument, and dad had asked mum to leave. So it was that night I came back from this job where actually things got really bad in me and my dad's relationship from there on, because my mum wasn't there anymore. And from there, we also had financial abuse come in, and I ended up in a lot of debt. I ended up with money being spent that I didn't know was being spent. And I was really, really broke financially, but also just emotionally shocked, because when mum wasn't there, the things that he was doing with her, I now realize was then doing to me. So hours of lecturing, like, he's talking about how evil my family is, how bad my mum was, just saying horrible things about people and, things that aren't necessary, but for hours. So I would come down, it might be 8 hours of talking, and I'm allowed to go to the toilet or get food when he says I can. I'm allowed to sit where he says I can. So it's like the control just went off the charts. And I just thought, well, he's going through a divorce. He needs some emotional support. And you mentioned it as well. You really want to give to your parent. You want to give them everything. And I really committed myself. I was like, this is really tough, but he needs me. So let me try and be there. And maybe he'll get better. But things got worse. And so, yeah, now looking back, I can see that me giving him what he was asking for was actually just encouraging him in these really, really unhealthy behaviors. And that, yeah, it wasn't helping him.
No, and also destroying yourself in the process. Because I recorded an episode this week, it's come out, about a little bit about my story with my dad. And you know, I have this image constantly, and I do inner child work, so I can see it in my head, where I'm literally reaching out to him all of the time. It's like I'm chasing after his love, because with my dad, he wasn't consistently on an asshole. You know, he was sometimes very loving, and it was just really erratic. I would say he was probably more on the narcissistic side than he was the loving side, but he was very much a Jekyll and Hyde. And I feel like I really grew up chasing after his love. So similar to your story, but slightly different, where I was allowed to go to uni, but to study the subjects that he wanted me to do. I was allowed to have a job, but to have a job that he wanted me to do. You know, I had a job when I was 16. He would keep my money from me and give me £10 of my own salary. You know, I wasn't allowed boyfriends or anything like that, but he did all of these things, but I would do them because I just didn't want him to shout, and I just wanted to please him. I wanted him to be nice to my mum, to my brother, and I just wanted a calm life. Like, I can't tell you how much I like get goosebumps if someone is shouting now. Just even to this day, I'm with the calmest man in the world who is not even capable of shouting. There's a lot more passive aggressiveness in this household than there is shouting. But, you know, because of that experience with him, and it's just, and even as an adult, before I started to start healing, and I was a lot older than you, like in my mid-30s, where he had died, and I was still chasing that love. I was still doing the things he wanted me to do. I started to chase people like him as well, like men like him that were inconsistent and unavailable. And it was just so, and I had no idea. It was like I was so closed off to it because it had just been my life for so long, because he felt he was my family. That, so almost like a person that's emotionally unavailable and has narcissism actually feels like family to me. And that's the problem. So I think it's amazing that you have, because it sounds like from, you know, and you have to share with everybody else, but because he had controlled you so much, so you didn't have relationships or anything like that, you hadn't, you know, because that could have been the result of years of having a dad like him as well. And I never was attracted to a shouty man. They would be you know, have narcissistic traits in other ways that were much more subtle. So it was just, and that was a big thing for me as part of all of this, that learning that I was still chasing his love even after, for so many years, even when he wasn't around anymore. Can you relate to that at all, of like, yeah?
So I think in my personal, just day-to-day life and relationships, it has been a bit different. So day to day, it took quite some time to kind of accept that I won't be able to have the connection with him that I wanted. And that was really quite a difficult process of letting go. And really that played out with him, because after I moved out, I was still in contact with him. So as we would talk, I would be thinking, okay, I can put in boundaries, but then at least I can still, you know, talk to him. And maybe if I'm really, really, really clear with my boundaries, he'll learn, and then we can talk. And yeah, I think through having those interactions with him and realizing that even talking and having boundaries is not helpful, over the year and a half or two since I moved out, I was able to let go more of trying to get the love from him.
So accepting that he is actually not capable of it, which is a real grief, isn't it? To really realize that.
That's the right word. Yeah. And I never thought that I would compare or feel such heaviness about a person who's still alive. But it felt like he died when I really realized that the things that I was hoping for in my mind, they just were not reality. And as things are, they can't be reality.
It's a fantasy, isn't it? A little girl fantasy is exactly the same. That one day you just think he's going to get better and change, and maybe if you show him the way, you know, that he will. But I mean, it must be so hard to get to, because for me, obviously my dad had taken his life, so he kind of took that out of my hands. Even though I still was struggling with it without him around. But for you to be able, and this is especially why I wanted you to come on, because you've made that really hard choice. First of all, from leaving that house and all that controlling behavior, you must have been massively triggered, loads of guilt, no money, you know, all of that stuff, to be that strong to leave, and then to be trying somewhat to have a relationship with him for a couple of years, and then deciding, actually, this isn't good for me, I'm going to have to walk away from this, and that for that being your parent. But you know, that you're like so incredibly brave and strong to be able to do that, and really like that's the amount of self-care and self-love that takes. And but I feel like, you know, I don't know if you agree with this, but stepping away from him was the only time that you can really start to heal, because when you're having that interaction with him on a regular, don't you think it just triggers it, happens again, and you're just in this constant loop and you can't heal because you're in that toxic relationship still, basically?
I completely agree. And it's interesting, because if you had proposed this to me a year and a half ago, or, you know, a bit sooner, I would not have been able to receive that information, that stepping away from him is the best thing to do. I think the thing that helped me to make that decision, or something that was important for me, is that if someone was giving me advice about what I should do with my dad, that they were definitely coming from a good place. Because what I really didn't want is for people to judge him.
Oh yeah, me too.
Yeah,
and so weird. You got like a crazy weird loyalty, haven't you? Yeah, I had that too.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think what helped a lot was to have, we spoke about her, Dr. Ramani.
Oh yeah, I love her.
Amazing. Yeah.
Lots of videos.
Amazing resource for narcissism and talking about that. And I think listening to her, because she's so objective, and obviously she doesn't know me, she doesn't know my dad, she's just talking about a character trait that people have. And hearing it from her, this just other source of the realities, really, of what you can expect from a narcissistic relationship, that's what helped me realize, actually, it's not about liking this person or not liking my dad or not. It's about doing what's best and healthiest for both people. And it was also important for me that it was healthiest for both people, because if I could sacrifice myself and make him better, I would. And that's what I was trying to do, but that doesn't work. So knowing that any of this self-sacrifice, it's not doing any good, it's not doing him any good, it's making him worse. I realized it has to be a space.
Because of the way that you've grown up and the childhood that you've had, I'm sure if you've learned about narcissism, you would have learned about codependency, and that's certainly what you and I have for our dads. And that feeling that we can actually save them, and that it is our job and our role in life to make them better. And if this is you and you're listening to this, it's not your job, and actually you do not help them. So I actually said this in my podcast, that I feel somewhat responsible for my dad's suicide, because I so much was being that person that was helping his relationship with my mom, doing all of his weird control things, you know, doing everything that he needed. So he was never massively triggered enough to go to the edge, right, to get the help that he needed, to figure out his shit and his trauma. Like, he didn't have to do that, because me, my mum and my brother were just performing for him all of the time and absorbing all of that until it became too much. And he actually decided not to speak to us. That's how it started. And then his mental health got worse before he took his life. But I don't believe, I think when we're the people pleasers and we're the kinder ones, we're the less shoutier ones, but we're still trying to get them to do what we want them to do too, right? But just in a very subtle way. And it's nobody's job to fix somebody else. Like, it's not nobody's job. Like, after you've stepped away, you've started educating yourself and, getting help, that's your responsibility, your healing, as is your dad's. And I know that's really hard to get to. And Dr. Romani is great. I might just put a link for her channel in the notes. But what else have you been doing to heal from this 20 odd years of abuse, basically?
So first of all, I think a lot started with just talking about it with my husband. I met him while I was still living with my dad. Mm-hmm. And I moved out about 6 months after that, after I met my boyfriend, now husband. But talking with him helped a lot in the beginning. And, after I'd moved out, I had a bit of space to reflect, so I could start to realize, oh, wow, that was really bad. That really hurts. And, I could start to open up about those things. And I think that was the start of me being able to be more honest with others and also more honest with myself. And then more recently, I've been really blessed with a job that supports me with getting counselling as well. So I've been having therapy sessions and they have been amazing, really, really amazing, just to really encourage and ask you such helpful questions, like asking me helpful questions about myself, making me be even more honest in more areas. And yeah, that's been really helpful.
Yeah, I think it is so powerful when you start to share your story and express your truth, because like both of us, we were these silenced little girls that kept the story within. And even when I didn't have to be silent about it, I was still silent out of protection for my dad, very much like you. I didn't want people to think badly of him, or I didn't want people to think he was a bad man, or I didn't want anyone to judge him, or I understood because he did this because he had a bad dad, or I was really protective of him. But over the last few years, I've just started to just own my story and share it, and it makes me feel less alone, and it helps with my healing. And it also helps me to connect to people like you. Like, me and Kayleigh met at the gym, had no idea that we had this story in common, right? And then I just saw one of your videos, because you speak so openly on YouTube, which I'll share your channel as well. And that was like, oh my God, there's so much of your story I could relate to. And that really helps, doesn't it? Because you feel like less alone in your story, because when you're a child or when you grow up and you're not telling anyone, you're holding all this shame and you believe that it's all your fault, when actually it's not. It's just part of our human experience. For whatever reason, he was meant to be your dad and my dad was meant to be my dad, and that's part of my growth and why I'm supposed to be here for whatever reason. So when you start to see it that way, then the anger of what you didn't receive and the grief gets a little bit easier, because you find a bit of a purpose in it. That's what's kind of helped me. And I don't know if that you found, since you've started to share your story and do your YouTube videos, etc., if that's given you something to sort of funnel it into, if you know what I mean.
It really has. You know what, after I posted that video, which took a lot of leading up to justify and make sure I should post it, that I was happy to. Once I did, I had messages from girls who I do not speak to on a deep level, but they were sharing that they can relate to my experience. Some of those were still in this abusive situation. Some were kind of moving away from it, but they might still be in contact, still struggling in their own ways. And I just, my heart was just wanting to scoop them up and help validate their experience and tell them it's not your fault. And by the way, you heeding and enabling them by going along with what they're saying is not helping them, and it's not helping you. So please think about giving yourself some distance and space. Yeah, it's really powerful.
This is somebody listening to your story, not just as a daughter of somebody that's their dad, but also somebody that's listening to your story and that's their husband. I mean, that's another thing. I've had my mum come on and talk about her experience, but I don't think she can really go into it, to really talk about how dark it was. But that's the other thing, you know, if you have a husband like that, he's going to affect your children, a bit like me and Kayleigh, one, and also just destroy everything about you. And, you know, because you are an abused woman or man, and that's really the same applies. You walk away, you may have to cut off contact, and I know that could be really difficult if that person is the father of your children and they're young and all that, but that has to be done. That's part of you know, getting yourself safe. Like I often say to my clients that, you know, if you're going to do this work, you have to find a place where you're safe and you're away from it, because there's no healing in the situation. And that's why having the boundaries and stepping away is so important, especially when somebody is showing extreme narcissistic traits. You have to accept that they're not going to change, and that you're going to have to figure out a way to be okay with that. And that's really hard.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting and also tricky point. I don't know how it is in your culture, or if you have a religion, but obviously, well, not obviously, in Christianity, I'm a Christian, you know, we believe that God loves marriage and that he hates divorce. I think everyone hates divorce because it's horrible.
It's not fun.
And so it's been a really interesting point for me to reflect on with where I stand on that in relation to abusive relationships, because, well, in Christianity, that their marriage covenant means that you both vow to love each other until death. And I think in relation to parents or in marriage, it's important to really understand what love is, because like we were talking about with going along with what an abusive person is saying, how that actually only enables them and doesn't help them. I would question if that's love, to you know, allow someone to abuse you. And so I definitely think that distance for a period of time or periods of time is absolutely something that should be considered, and it's a personal choice. You know, some people might think, I want my kids to have some kind of contact, the number of times per month or year or whatever that is should be considered. Really, it's really important.
Yeah, and having the space to actually hear your own voice, to come up with that decision, listen to your own intuition, rather than, you know, I could hear my dad's voice in my head for many, many years. Like I heard his voice, not my own. And it's taken a long time for me to be able to actually hear my own inner guidance. To make those kind of decisions. Should I have boundaries in this situation? Should I not? Because when you've been abused for so many years, you can't hear it. And that's again why the space is so important. And I know that your dad used your faith as a way to control you, which is obviously not what the religion is for. But I think it sounds like your faith in Christianity has been a really a great tool and love to help get you through this, right? So it's that, you know, listening to your story, did you want to say how it's maybe helped you?
Yeah, happy to. I think it's honestly been the only thing that could guide me through it, through this trauma, through the healing, through having hope for myself and for him. And it started when I was younger, when I was still at home, and I had that first realization of, oh wow, there's another way to live life, which I hadn't seen with my eyes, but I could see it in the Bible, and I could see how God would love us. And I was like, oh, like God's our father. He doesn't do that. That's not how fathers are supposed to be. It's not what God intended for children and for their parents. And then when I was leaving, to also have hope that as well, God does have a plan for everyone, and God has a plan for me. And something that's inspiring me a lot right now, along with helping other people by talking about my story and being open, is that the better I can live my life now, and the more people I can help and bless and love, like at the end of the day, my dad did, like, I do come from him. I am his child. And if he's going to bring the anger and the fear that he has into the world, at least through me, he's brought something else that's good into the world.
Yeah, and, of course.
Of
course. You know, I believe a lot about ancestral trauma and how, like, it's getting passed down. So, like, he wasn't like that for any reason. It came from from his family in some way, and that's coming to you, and that by you healing and letting go of some of these layers of abuse and trauma and not carrying it on for a start, and spreading that love and like care across to people, as opposed to the trauma and the darkness. Like, I see my dad as the darkness, and that you are choosing to be the light. That's, I'm not a Christian, but I do very much believe in, something bigger than us, and that has been something that's really helped me, because there was a time, because I haven't always had faith like yourself, where I felt like I was destined like for bad, like that was my, that was my destiny, my karma, that these bad things were happening to me and I didn't have any control or power over them. But I realized that that's not true. Like, yes, I couldn't control being his child, but I believe that's for a reason. And I choose not to let that make me dark. I choose to bring my light into the the world or whatever. And like somebody was saying to me the other day, like, I've bought this great house, oh, your dad would be so proud of you. I was like, no, he wouldn't be. Like, he wouldn't be proud of me. But just like, and I know that because I just know that that's not who he was. He'd be jealous, he'd be annoyed with me, that why did I get this and he didn't, and all the struggles he had, why did I, it would just be like this weird competition. And so I hold my dad in my heart. He's a part of who I am. He's a massive part of my story. I talk about him a lot in my work, because he's an example of a man that let that darkness overcome him. And then there's great people like yourself that have been through like horrific amount of trauma and abuse, that are still like smiling away and trying to be like, come through it and make a difference. So I'm just so impressed by you. So thank you so much for sharing your story and how you've come through it. And because it's, like I said, it's an incredibly brave thing to walk away from a parent. Like, it's not an easy decision. And since you have, do you feel like you're getting better and stronger? And
I really do. I really, really do. I think each time I have space with my therapist and also with myself to reflect on where I am, I'm in a safe place. I don't need to worry if I hear footsteps coming up the stairs. If I hear a door slam, it's not someone that's angry, it's just the wind, And being able to really enjoy that and not feel anxious in that space has only been increasing, really. And really,
as you're
really
getting used to being safe, right? That takes such a long time. The nervous system takes a really long time to, well, I don't think it ever resets. I think it takes a long time because I still get such bad triggers sometimes. I'm like, oh God, there it is again. The trauma's back.
Wow. Yeah.
But is there anything else that you wanted to share with everyone before we wrap up?
I would definitely like to encourage anyone who is in a abusive relationship, or anything that you think is just unusual, or you feel any kind of unsafeness in your relationship, to find someone and talk to them about it. Even if your partner, father, best friend, whoever it is that's doing this to you is saying you shouldn't be talking about it, please find someone who you can trust to talk about it, because you're worth that, and you deserve support. You deserve to have people around you.
Is that what you did? Like when you were at home and everything was going crazy, did you find your voice and tell someone your story? Is that how it started?
I told my then boyfriend. Yeah. But growing up, I didn't tell anyone. So it was only when it got so bad that I couldn't deny it anymore that I realized, oh, I should really tell someone.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Yeah.
I'm in a lot of debt. Yeah, no, I was the same. I never told anyone. I think I started to tell people a little bit after he died, but and again, never to the extent that I now talk about it, because again, like just you've been told to be silent your whole life. It's really, really hard. And then it's crazy, isn't it? I bet you when you were telling your boyfriend, he was like, that is crazy. When you see someone's reaction and you're like, is it? Because it's my life. I didn't know that was crazy.
Yeah, I don't think he realized the full extent. So I took the time to fully explain and even to fully realize myself. So yeah, but certainly now there are still things where it's like, I didn't know that, yeah.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that you found someone to be that support for you and find your way out of this situation and getting yourself healthy and all of that. Like, you're such an inspiration to anybody that's listening, whether it's their dad or their boyfriend or, you know, uncle or mum, whoever. Like, it's such an inspirational story. Thank you so much for coming along, and I will put Kayleigh's YouTube channel into the episode notes. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that I can? So I'll do Dr. Romany's channel. Anything else that's been good for you?
Dr. Amani's the best source, and then we're Kayleigh.Immanuel on Instagram and YouTube. And thank you, Manpreet, for making this podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Putting yourself out to be so consistent and get this information out to people, because they really need it, and what you're doing is so important. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have somebody listen to my podcast and it's like, oh God, that's my story. I thought it was just me. It's like, no, there's just a lot of people on this planet where it's their story. We need to stop being silent about it and just share our stories. So thank you so much, Kayleigh. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.